I was so excited when Fujifilm announced the X-E4, the successor to the X-E3, which I loved using as my backup and secondary body to first my X-T2 and then my X-T4. X-E3 was a great little camera to have in your bag, either for that peace of mind of having a secondary body if something happened to your primary, or if I was working with a prime lens on my primary body and I needed wide zoom capability for any reason, then I could just throw it on this camera and have that available. So when the X-E4 was announced, I was super excited to finally have a camera that on the inside was exactly the same as my primary body, the X-T4. Functionality would be a little bit different, but the images, the raw files, image quality settings, those would all be the same. Now, when I finally got the X-E4 in my hands, my feelings kind of changed a little bit. Yes, it is smaller. The redesign, however, I just looked at it and kind of thought, you know what? I don't think this camera is going to work for me because a lot of the major controls were removed out of this camera, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But then I started going into the menus and seeing how I could customize the camera to make up for that. And then I started thinking, you know what? This camera might actually work for me just fine as a secondary body or even a primary when I don't want to take my larger cameras out, just have this with me. But then when I finally took this camera out into the wild, I went back to that secondary feeling of, you know what, this camera just isn't going to work for me. I want it to, but after a week of shooting, I just couldn't bring myself to upgrade my X-E3 to the X-E4. So this video, there are a ton of X-E4 review videos out there and technical comparisons where, compare the specifications side by side. I'm not going to do that here. Here, I'm going to look more at if you upgrade your X-E3 to an X-E4 or add an X-E4 to your kit, or even if you are brand new to the Fujifilm system, what it means from a practical sense. So at first glance, these two cameras look very, very similar. The body has some slight redesigns. The top plate on the X-E4 is a little more squared off than the X-E3, but otherwise, exterior mostly looks the same. A lot of the big differences are on the inside, where the X-E4 has the same sensor and processor as the X-T4, though not featuring in-body stabilization. But then once you take a closer look, you start to notice some things are missing on the X-E4 that were on the X-E3. First one being the focus mode switch found on the front of the camera. That is no longer anywhere on the X-E4. You now have to do that by going into the menus. Looking at the top of the camera, the auto function on the X-E3 is no more. They've added a P on the mode dial for entering program auto mode. Not as much of a big deal, but they have put a Q button where the auto switch used to be. The Q button is no longer on the rear of the camera on the thumb grip, which again is no more. There is no more thumb grip. The Q button is now on the top of the camera. But then, looking at the back, there is no more rear command dial on the X-E4. This has some serious implications for your workflow and your technique that you're going to have to get used to. And then some other small things like the autofocus lock and auto exposure lock buttons have been combined into one. The playback button has been moved. Those are all minor things. But what really, really got me when I started actually working with this camera was the removal of that focus mode switch and the rear command dial. And then when it came time to set up my custom settings in the X-E4, the way I had them set up in the X-E3, I discovered the custom settings in the X-E4 have been completely reworked and are different than anything that is in any other Fujifilm camera. And I wasn't too keen on that either, something that I haven't gotten used to, and I don't know if I ever will. And the reason I can't really get on board with the X-E4 is the user interface. Nearly every other Fujifilm camera, the controls are set up in a similar manner. I can go from an X-E3 to a 100V to an X-T4 to an EFX50R even without having to switch my brain into a different mode. My brain and my fingers are wired for controlling those cameras in a similar way, and I have them set up where I can go from one camera to another without having to stop and think, how do I control this? The X-E4, however, seems to have crossed that threshold. And even after taking it out and using it every day for a week, I still end up fumbling around with the controls. Now, if I used it for more than a week, could I get used to that and finally become proficient in it? Yeah, I'm sure I could. However, that would unwire my brain for all of the other Fujifilm cameras. I would get used to this and then pick up the other ones and then fumble around with those. And that is incredibly important. One of the things when people immediately upgrade to new cameras is you have to relearn the system for the new camera. And there is a period there where you may miss photos because you're not proficient controlling the camera. And I don't really want that. I want a seamless experience from one camera to another. Now, I'm not discouraging anyone from considering the X-E4. It is still a wonderful camera. I want to love it. I just can't because it's too dissimilar from my other Fujifilm cameras, and it's flustering me as a photographer. Now, I wanted to go into the big long list of what all of those differences were and what they meant for me in this video, but that would make it too long. So you can click on the little link up here to go to a blog post, which I'll also have linked in the description for this video, that kind of lays all of that out and what those implications are. But if you only have an X-E3 and you're considering going to an X-E4, I would definitely consider that. But I just want you to realize that you're not going to be able to put down your X-E3 and then pick up an X-E4 just as if it's the same camera. You will have to relearn how to control the camera, the custom settings, and all of those things. So there will be a period there where you're going to have to learn a new camera, but that may be totally worth it to you. If you're new to the Fujifilm system entirely, the X-E4 is an amazing camera. I mean, just look at how small this interchangeable lens camera is for what you get on the inside. No, there's no weather sealing, there's no in-body stabilization, but what you get inside of this camera for such a small body is quite amazing. But if you're considering adding the X-E4 to your kit to complement other Fujifilm cameras as either a secondary body, an alternative, or whatever, I just want you to be aware that it is considerably different from all of the other Fujifilm cameras that you may own. Take that into consideration. I'm not discouraging anyone. I just want to bring this to your attention. At the end of the day, it's all about, did you get the shot? And if you miss the shot because you're reaching for a rear command dial that is no longer there, and then you're trying to remember, oh my God, where did that control go? That's no good. All right, so keep that in mind when you're considering upgrading to the X-E4. If you have any other questions or comments about the differences between these two cameras and what that means for your photography technique, please leave them below in the comments, and I'll see you on the next video.